So like many young people, I think I wrote some poetry when I was at school. It never went very much further. And then I had not much interest in poetry until I started in my career as a singer. And then everything changed. And there's so much music set to wonderful poetry that I found that I was just as much interested in the poetry as the music. And so that developed my love and interest in poetry. And then since I stopped singing, that has continued. And so I've spent a lot of time reading a lot of poetry. So I put together this little program. They're all programs from my past and poems which I've lived with and which I love. I have to say they're all British at the moment. This is not by design. It's just because those are the ones that I happen to make up this program. So I'm going to start with a poem by Rudyard Kipling. All right, probably we know mostly Rudyard Kipling now simply through Walt Disney's Jungle Book. And then there are things like the Just So stories, but he also wrote a lot of poetry. His dates are from 1868 to 1936, and he was a product of the British Empire. There's no two ways about that. And he was one of those people that really believed that our Western world, our advanced civilization, we have the responsibility to pass things on to the more primitive countries, of course, which made up a lot of the British Empire, places like India and Africa. The fact that they had their own cultures didn't make too much difference. The British were determined that they should be civilized, educated, given religion, education, a whole system and infrastructure, and that's exactly what they did. And Kipling was one of the people that really believed in the benefits of that. I think probably the harm greatly outweighed, as we look back through history, greatly outweighed the benefits in actual fact. So he was born in India. His parents had moved to India, diplomatic service, and so he grew up for 6 years in India, and then he was sent back to school in England, and then came back to India at the age of 17, when he became a journalist and a writer. And of course, the things that he had to write, India was an extremely exotic country, full of all kinds of interest. And so there was the scandals, of course, and all the things happening in the British society in India. And then there was India itself. And one of the interesting things about Kipling was that he got very interested in the soldier in the ranks. And he wrote many poems about the ordinary soldier. In fact, he gave the soldier a voice and a personality. Before that, only generals and very important soldiers had been written about. Now he started to write poems about the ordinary soldier and in the vernacular of the soldiers. He came to know them well, he came to know their ways and their ways of expressing things. So my first poem is a poem which he wrote in 1890, and it's called On the Road to Mandalay. And I'm going to read you, I'm going to try and perform this with a Cockney accent, okay? Now the thing about the Cockney accent you need to know is they speak a bit like that, you know? They cut all the vowels out, they cut all the consonants out, don't bother with them. And they use, instead of TH, they're inclined to use an F or a V, just to make things difficult. So they say with, you know, they don't say with. And they swallow the consonants, they never use H's, and, well, you get the hang of it. Oh yes, and they like to add T's onto the end of nouns. So you could say, well, I went to the beach like, and I fell down the cliff, with the T on the end. Well, you'll hear this. So here we go. Now, I sang this as a song. This is a very popular song. This poem had been used as a very popular song. I knew that, you know, and I sang it and I recorded it. But the composer had only used 2 verses. So when I discovered the poem itself, I realized it was extremely rich in a way and expressed a real longing. This poem is about longing. On the road to Mandalay. By the Elmo Mine Pagoda, looking eastwards to the sea, there's a Burma girl a-sitting, and I know she thinks on me. For the wind is in the palm trees, and the temple bells, they say, come you back, you British soldier, come you back to Mandalay. On the road to Mandalay, where the old flotilla lay. Can't you hear their paddles chunking from Rangoon to Mandalay? On the road to Mandalay, where the flying fishes play, and the dawn comes up like thunder out of China across the bay. Her petticoat was yellow, and her little cap was green, and her name was Superior, yeah, just the same as Seaboard's queen. And I seen her first a-smoking of a whacking white cheroot, and a-wasting Christian kisses on an even idol's foot. Ha! Bloomin' idol made of mud, what they call the great god Bud. Well, plucky lot she thought of idols when I kissed her where she stood. When the mist was on the rice fields and the sun was dropping low, she'd get a little banjo out and play "Coo-la-lo-lo" with her arm around my shoulder and her cheek against my cheek. We used to watch the steamers and the affies piling teak. Elephants are piling teak in the sludgy, squudgy creek, where the silence hung that heavy you was half afraid to speak. Well, that's all shoved far behind me, long ago and far away. And there ain't no buses running from the bank to Mandalay. And I'm learning here in London what the 10-year soldier tells. If you've heard the Easter calling, you won't never eat naught else. No, you won't eat nothing else but them spicy garlic smells, and the sunshine, and the palm trees, and the tinkly temple bells. Ah, I'm sick of wasting leather on these gritty paving stones, and the blasted English drizzle wakes a fever in me bones. And though I walks out with 50 housemaids from Chelsea to the Strand, and they talk a lot of loving, but what do they understand, eh? Beefy-faced and grubby, what do they understand? I've a neater, sweeter maiden in a cleaner, greener land. So, ship me somewhere east of Suez where the best is like the worst, where there ain't no 10 commandments, and a man can rise the first. For the temple bells are calling, and it's there, that I would be by that old Mine Pagoda, looking lazy at the sea. On the road to Mandalay, where the old flotilla lay, with our sick beneath the awnings when we went to Mandalay. On the road to Mandalay, where the flying fishes play, and the dawn comes up like thunder out of China crossed the bay. So all these poems that I'm going to either perform or read in this little session, it's all rhyming poetry. I've gone back to the world of rhyme, which of course the contemporary poets have given up. I mean, blank verse and almost prose-like poetry gives you much more freedom. You're not tied down by the process of rhyming. But I kind of like it. I think it's sort of fun. Well, the next poet is a man called Robert Service, and he was also a Brit who emigrated. I mean, when he was 21, he took off and went to America first and then ended up in Canada. He was a bank clerk as a young man. And then he got to America. He tried all kinds of things. He was a cowboy. He was a very adventurous man, Robert Service. His dates were pretty well the same as Rudyard Kipling. He was born a few years later in the 1870s. He actually died after the Second World War and lived into the 1950s. He, like Kipling, I mean, the serious poets accuse him of writing doggerel. And doggerel is really sort of largely an expression used for comic verse, rhythmic rhyming verse, but they didn't consider it as being serious poetry. Robert Service himself never called himself a poet, but he said that he wrote verses. He was a versifier. So he ended up in Canada at the very end of the 19th century, and got a job with the Canadian Bank of Commerce. And they sent him out to Whitehorse and Dawson, eventually to Dawson, an outpost of the bank, but in the famous Yukon area and where the great Klondike gold rush had taken place. Well, Robert Service loved it. I mean, he was thrown into this 10 years, actually, he got there, 10 years after the gold rush, but still the stories were there. And he soaked up all these stories, and also this incredible area of largely unexplored wilderness, the Canadian wilderness of mountains, forests, lakes, incredible extremes of climate, the cold and everything. So he wrote his first volume of poems called Songs of a Sourdough. And Songs of the Sourdough, I mean, they must have been published, I think, probably in the early 1900s. By 1920, they had earned him $100,000, which translated into present-day money is about 2.4 million. And he became a very rich man through writing doggerel. And they were immensely popular. He led a very interesting life too. He went on to write. He became a war coach. He drove an ambulance during the First World War. He also started to write novels. He moved to Hollywood for silent films. Many of his books were adapted for silent films. He's a very interesting man and a very wealthy one. So this is probably his most famous poem, and it is called The Shooting of Dan McGrew. A bunch of boys were whooping it up in the Malamute Saloon, and the kid that handles the music box was hitting a ragtime tune. Back at the bar, in a solo game, sat Dangerous Dan McGrew, and watching him was his light of love, the lady that's known as Lou. When out of the night there was 50 below, and into the din and the glare, there stumbled a miner fresh from the creeks, dog dirty and loaded for bear. He looked like a man with a foot in the grave and scarcely the strength of a louse, yet he tilted a poke of dust on the bar and called for drinks for the house. There was none could place the stranger's face, so we searched ourselves for a clue, but we drank his health, and the last to drink was Dangerous Dan McGrew. Now there's men that somehow just grip your eyes and hold them hard like a spell, and the stranger, he seemed to me like a man that had lived through hell, with the face most hair and the jeery stare of a dog whose day is done. As he watered the green stuff in his glass, the drops fell one by one. Then I got to figuring who he was, and wondering what he'd do, and I turned my head, and there watching him was the lady that's known as Lou. His eyes went rubbering round the room, and he seemed in a kind of daze, till that old piano fell at last in the way of his wandering gaze. The ragtime kid was having a drink. There was no one else on the stool, so the stranger staggers across the room and flops down there like a fool in a buckskin shirt that was glazed with dirt. He sat, and I saw him sway. Then he clasped the keys with his taloned hands. Oh my God, but that man could play. Were you ever out in the great alone when the moon was awful clear and the icy mountains hemmed you in with a silence you could almost hear, with only the howl of the timber wolf and you camped there in the cold, a half-dead thing in a stark-dead world, clean mad for the muck called gold? While high overhead, green, yellow, and red, the north lights swept in bars. Then you've a hunch what that music meant. Hunger and night and the stars. Then, on a sudden, the music changed so soft that you scarce could hear. But you felt that your soul had been looted clean of all that it once held dear, that someone had stolen the woman you loved, that her love was a devil's lie, that your guts were gone, and the best for you was to crawl away and die. 'Twas the crowning cry of a heart's despair, and it thrilled you through and through, and it found its goal in the blackened soul of the lady that's known as Lou. Then the stranger turned, and his eyes, they burned in a most peculiar way. In a buckskin shirt that was glazed with dirt he sat, and I saw him sway. Then his lips went in a kind of grin, and he spoke, and his voice was calm. And, "Boys," says he, "you don't know me, and none of you care a damn. But I want to state, and my words, they're straight, and I'll bet my poke they're true, that one of you here is the hound of hell, and that one is Dan McGrew." And I ducked my head, and the lights went out, and two guns blazed in the dark. And a woman screamed, and the lights went up. And two men lay stiff and stark. Pitched on his head and pumped full of lead was dangerous Dan McGrew, while the man from the creeks lay clutched to the breast of the lady that's known as Lou. Well, there we have two, what I would call very clearly performance poems, or verses, if you want. It was interesting that Robert Service became known as the Canadian Kipling. So there is a great similarity between these two men. Well, now we move on, and this time another British poet, David Herbert Lawrence, known as D.H. Lawrence. It was a kind of sad life that he lived. Born in 1885, he died in 1930 at the age of 45, a basically young man. He had never been healthy, struggled with pneumonia and bronchial problems. The son of an illiterate miner, a mother who was a teacher but had to work in a factory in order to make ends meet, very close relationship with his mother, and a wonderful writer. He was an incredible observer of nature in all its forms, and he believed, he moved away from the Victorian formality. He believed in touch. He believed in the necessity for human beings to touch each other, be it in friendship or love or whatever. But, and of course, he was, I think, brutally honest about himself and about what he wrote, and sensitive, and also highly sensuous. And so, very sadly, his books, his famous books, Sons and Lovers and Lady Chatterley's Lover, of course, were absolutely censored from the word go. And he was known as a pornographer and not considered to be a serious writer at all at the time, except by some fellow writers. So it was a kind of sad life, and he was really exiled from Britain from most of his life. But so I'm going to read you a poem. I have to read this one. I do not know this one by memory. But it is called Love on the Farm. And it was written in 1913, before the First World War. And you will see why he became a writer who was censored very much. This is a strange poem. It's written from the woman's point of view. It begins with a woman's statement, and then it ends. The whole end of the poem is the woman's statement. It is a sort of little paean to nature. It is rhyming. He also wrote in blank verse, and was one of the first of the moderns, of the really modern poets. But this one is rhyming, and it's some strange rhyming, as you will hear. It was originally called Cruelty and Love, and then renamed Love on the Farm. What large dark hands are those at the window, grasping in the golden light which weaves its way through the evening wind at my heart's delight? Ah, only the leaves. But in the west I see a redness suddenly come into the evening's anxious breast. 'Tis the wound of love goes home. The woodbine creeps abroad, calling low to her lover. The sunlit flirt who all the day has poised above her lips in play, and stolen kisses, shallow and gay of pollen, now has gone away. She woos the moth with her sweet low word, and when above her his moth wings hover, then her bright breast she will uncover, and yield her honey drop to her lover. In the yellow evening glow saunters a man from the farm below, leans and looks in the low-built shed where the swallow has hung her marriage bed. The bird lies warm against the wall. She glances quick her startled eyes towards him, then she turns away her small head, making warm display of red upon the throat. Her terrors sway her out of the nest's warm, busy ball. Her plaintive cry is heard as she flies in one blue stoop from out the skies into the twilight's empty hall. A water hen beside the rushes, hide your quaintly scarlet blushes, still your quick tail. Lie still as dead, till the distant falls over his ominous tread. The rabbit presses back her ears, turns back her liquid, anguished eyes, and crouches low, Then with wild spring spurts from the terror of his oncoming, to be choked back the wire ring, her frantic effort throttling. Piteous brown ball of quivering fears. Ah, soon in his large hard hand she dies, and swings all loose from the swing of his walk. Yet calm and kindly are his eyes, and ready to open in brown surprise. Should I not answer to his talk, or should he my tears surmise? I hear his hand on the latch, and rise from my chair, watching the door open. He flashes bare his strong teeth in a smile, and flashes his eyes in a smile like triumph upon me. Then careless wise he flings a rabbit soft on the table board and comes towards me. Ah, the uplifted sword of his hand against my bosom, and oh, the broad blade of his glance that asks me to applaud his coming. With his hand, he turns my face to him and caresses me with his fingers that still smell grim of rabbit's fur. God, I am caught in a snare. I know not what fine wire is round my throat. I only know I let him finger there my pulse of life, and let him nose like a stoat who sniffs with joy before he drinks the blood. And down his mouth comes to my mouth, and down his bright dark eyes come over me like a hood upon my mind. His lips meet mine, and a flood of sweet fire sweeps across me. So I drown against him, die, and find death good. And now, again, something very different. This is a very, very simple and sweet poem written by Christina Rossetti. Her dates were 1830 to 1894. And she was one of the major British women poets. A very fine poet. And her brother, of course, was Dante Gabriel Rossetti, who was one of the founders of the Pre-Raphaelite school, one of the greatest schools of British painting. So this is a poem. It's very simple. Oh, and I should explain, it uses a poetic term, which is haply. Haply I may remember, or haply may forget. And it, of course, it is not happily. It is a poetic form of the expression, it may happen that, or perhaps, right? That is this, the way she uses the term, the word, haply. So this poem is called, very simply, When I Am Dead, My Dearest. When I am dead, my dearest, sing no sad songs for me. Plant thou no roses at my head, nor shady cypress tree. Be the green grass above me, with showers and dewdrops wet. And if thou wilt, remember. And if thou wilt, forget. I shall not see the shadows. I shall not feel the rain. I shall not hear the nightingale sing on, as if in pain. And dreaming through the twilight that doth not rise nor set, haply I will remember, or haply may forget. I must say this poem and a few poems of D.H. Lawrence are my very favorite poems. There's a wonderful poem called The Snake, which is not rhyming, which again is a very affecting poem. Well, from the seriousness of love on the farm, I think we need a change. So I'm going to move to Noel Coward, okay? Noel Coward was in a way the British version of Cole Porter, okay? So we have these two men that both of them lived about the same time through most of the 20th century and wrote some of the greatest music, popular music that was written at that time. They were both renowned for their wit and sense of humor. One very American, one very British. Noel Coward wrote plays, directed, acted, sang songs. You know, he was a very... Oh, there's a wonderful quotation about him from the Times magazine, which says, I've got to put my glasses on very quickly. It says about Noel Coward was that he had a sense of personal style, a combination of cheek and chic, pose and poise, which I think is very nice. Well, I'm going to, perform you. It's a song, in actual fact, these are the lyrics, and it's called "In a Bar on the Piccola, Marina," and it is about, and immediately, as soon as he starts the song, you know exactly what this is about. In a bijou abode in St. Barnabas Road, not far from the Esher bypass. We are talking about suburban London. And we're talking about a housewife, sort of, I would say, slightly upper middle class housewife who lived in suburban London, called Mrs. Wentworth Brewster. Right, so here we go. In a bar on the Piccola, Marina. In a bijou abode in St. Barnabas Road, not far from the Esher bypass, lived a mother and wife who for most of her life let every adventure fly past. She had 2 strapping daughters and a rather dull son, and a much duller husband who at 61 elected to retire and later on expire. Sing hallelujah, hey nonny no, hey nonny no, hey nonny no, he joined the feathered choir. On a wet afternoon, in the middle of June, they all of them came home soaking, having laid him to rest by special request in the family vault at Woking. And then, in the middle of the funeral wake, with a mouthful of excellent Madeira cake, his widow cried, "That's done! My life's at last begun. Sing hallelujah, hey nonny no, hey nonny no, hey nonny no. It's time I had some fun. Today, though hardly a jolly day, at least to set me free, we'll all have a lovely holiday on the island of Capri." In a bar on the Piccola Marina, life came to Mrs. Wentworth Brewster. Fate beckoned her and introduced her into a rather queer, unfamiliar atmosphere. She'd just sit there, propping up the bar beside a fisherman who sang with a guitar. When accused of having gone too far, she merely cried, "Just fancy me, funiculi, funicula." When he bellowed, "Que bella signorina," sheer ecstasy at once produced a wild shriek from Mrs. Wentworth Brewster, changing her whole demeanor. Then both her daughters and her sons cried, "Please come home, Mamma." She murmured rather bibliciously, "Who do you think you are? Nobody can afford to be so la-di-bloody-da in a bar on the Piccola Marina." Every fisherman cried, "Viva, viva, che bel ragazzo!" piazza. When she sat on the grand piazza, everybody would rise. Every fisherman sighed, viva, viva che bel inglese. Someone even said, whoops-a-daisy, which was quite a surprise. Each night, she'd make some gay excuse, and beaming with goodwill, she'd just slip into something loose and totter down the hill to a bar on the Piccola Marina, where love came to Mrs. Wentworth Brewster. Hot flushes of delight suffused her. Right round the bend she went, picture her astonishment. Day in, day out she would gad about, because she felt she was no longer on the shelf. Night out, night in, knocking back the gin, she cried, hurrah for Nicola, for Nicoli, for Nick yourself. Just for fun, 3 young sailors from Messina bowed low to Mrs. Wentworth Brewster, said scusi, and politely goosed her. Then there was quite a shena. Her family, in floods of tears, cried, leave these men, Mamma. She said, they're just high-spirited, as all Italians are, and most of them have a great deal more to offer than Papa. In a bar on the Piccola Marina. And so, here for my last poem we go back and have a little bit more fun. This poem is by a man called David Daches. And David Daches lived from 1912 to 2005. And he was an interesting combination of Scottish Jewish. His father was the rabbi at the synagogue in Edinburgh. And David Daches was a very erudite scholar, wrote many histories of literature, English literature, Scottish literature, all kinds of things, was a critic and a writer himself, a poet. So I'm going to read you this little poem that he wrote. Now this is an exercise in simplicity, if you want, whereby all the rhyming is done on the same syllable, which happens to be in this poem 8, right? There are 30 lines of it, all rhyming with the same syllable. Is that the word I want? Yeah, I think so. Anyway, it is called To Skate, Skating Better Than Her Date. Wait, Kate, you skate at such a rate you leave behind your skating mate. Your splendid speed won't you abate? He's lagging far behind you, Kate. He brought you on this skating date, his shy affection thus to state. But you on skating concentrate, and leave him with a woeful weight pressed on his heart. Oh, what a state a man gets into, how irate he's bound to be with life and fate, if when he tries to promulgate his love, the loved one turns to skate far, far ahead to demonstrate superior speed and skill. Oh, hate is sure to come of love, dear Kate, if you so treat your skating mate. Turn again, Kate, or simply wait until he comes, then him berate coyly for catching up so late. For Kate, he knows your skating's great. He's seen your splendid figure 8. He's not here to contemplate your supersonic skating rate. That is not why he made the date. He's anxious to expatiate on how he wants you for his mate. And don't you want to hear him, Kate? Well, that's the end of this little program, and I hope you've enjoyed this step back into the world of rhyme. I've enjoyed it. very much, and look forward to another opportunity to bring you some more poetry of probably a very different kind. So thank you for listening.